Just in the meantime, I'll introduce myself and kind of get us started here, get rolling. First of all, my name is Pierre Du Bois. I'm the founder of Zamana Analytics and also joining in with the Black Tides group here as well. This is part of the Tech Survival Skills series on microaggressions in the workplace. And this is meant to be a great panel discussion, a great informal panel discussion to talk about experiences that our panelists have had in the workplace, and also some also that allow people to ask some questions as well, and then also provide maybe some answers as well uh, uh, for today. So a couple of things here, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. So first of all, this is going to be a pretty relatively, it's I'm gonna say relatively informal, where we have our panelists. I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists here in a moment. We do ask people to be very respectful in the room, of course. Again, this is supposed to be a professional setting where you can get to ask questions, and then also maybe if you have something you may want to bring up as well. We'll talk a little bit about what microaggressions are. A little bit about, won't get too much into the history of it, but definitely about what they are and why that they are part of the landscape, particularly now, and talk a little bit about it from the perspective from a data science and data engineering, and if you do any sort of data work from that perspective, helping people to understand why microaggressions are a concern within the workplace as well. First, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First of all, actually, well, you know what? I'm going to allow the panelists to speak for themselves just a little bit. So I'm going to start with Kiera, and then Jamal, and then Jared, who as well, who will be our three panelists for today. So Kiera, would you like to start and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I am Kiera. I guess I'll start with my current position. So I'm currently a BI developer slash data engineer for a marketing analytics firm. I have been in the data space since 2016 and held a bunch of uh, different data roles since then. I also have co-founded my company called The Block, or I actually founded it myself. It's called the Data Block, basically helping people to transition into data, or if you're seasoned, I help you level up and figure out what you want to do next for your data career, and also do analytics consulting on the side. I have recently joined Black Tide, so this will actually be my first space with them. Super excited to talk to you all today.
Okay, great, excellent. Jamal, would you introduce yourself, sir?
Yes. Hey everyone. Hope everyone's having a good evening. My name is Jamal. I go by Data J on Twitter. Um, I've been in the marketing side of things since 2015, actually. Traditional marketing and digital marketing. So I deal with analytics from that perspective. And my current full time is Tier 2 specialist. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, great. Jared, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jared Harms. I'm on the executive committee for Black Tides. I'm also one of the social media co-leads. Professionally, I'm a data and business process analyst with Forge Consulting, and then also so I do that full time, and then part time I'm also an adjunct professor of decision and system sciences at St. Joseph's University, where I teach a few graduate level classes in data, graduate, master's, and MBA level courses in data analytics. So it's a pleasure having you all here tonight.
Great. Well, thank you, panelists, for the great introductions. Let's start just a little bit with a quick definition of what microaggressions are, and as true to internet protocol, we turn to the great page that is Wikipedia for a very basic definition. First of all, from Wikipedia, um, microaggressions are subtle actions or statements that indirectly or unintentionally make someone from a marginalized group feel that he or she is being attacked, insulted, or discriminated against. The history of this goes back to to the term being coined by Harvard University psychiatrist Chester Pierce back in 1970. And he did that to describe insults and dismissals which he regularly witnessed non-Black Americans inflicting on African Americans at that time. So this is not radically new. It's not something that's coming from the 90s or even from the 2000s. It's a term that comes back to 1970 with some study that's been done just recently back in 2020. I'll share the link later on. There was a study that came out that basically said that microaggressions aren't just innocent blunders. There's some research that links them with racial bias. But what I like to do is ask our panelists, basically, are microaggressions difficult to address, and what is it about them that creates a challenge for each of them personally? And I would hope that they also could share a little bit of their perspective being in the data science space, just what they have seen so far in their experiences. So maybe Kiara, I'd like to start with you if that's okay.
Yes. So I do think that microaggressions are difficult to address, mainly because it creates a challenge personally and professionally in a way that personally I get anxious about causing conflict, and I don't know how to approach situations like that sometimes because I don't want to come off a certain way. I don't want to skew someone's perception of me. For instance, if I'm being petty or aggressive or mean or other stereotypes that Black people tend to get named when they speak up for themselves, and then also just the whole process of trying to process my feelings while also trying not to hurt someone else's feelings, even though they hurt me. And then also professionally, I worry if it'll impact performance reviews. For instance, if your manager can sometimes ask people for peer reviews from other people, and that might affect that, or your chances at promotions. Will this decrease the amount of times that maybe someone will want to work with me, especially if there's major projects coming up? Maybe I will be removed from being considered for that. And then also, if I have to continue to work with this person long term, I don't want to create a hostile environment, or worse, this somehow magically backfires, and then I could possibly get reported to HR, like if I try and speak up. So I think those are the challenges that I face when I think about addressing microaggressions.
Okay, great. Jamal, do you have something you'd like to add?
You called me because I put the 100 sign.
Yep, that's the official rule.
Nah, but I was just gonna say I would actually agree with what Kira said, and also I think it's I don't know if it's just hard to address or if it's really that we kind of just got used to dealing with certain things, and so we don't really think to approach these situations. We kind of just put up with it, and kind of just get comfortable and go with the flow and do what we have to do. So yeah, I would say it can be hard to address.
Okay, great. Jared, do you have something that you'd like to add to that comment?
Yeah, for me, what I found with microaggressions is that they're so subtle to where even if you do try to do something about it or try to report it, it's very easy to just put off as, oh, it's just a mistake or something like that. But at the same time, it can be it can be such a small, quote unquote, small incident, but it could really have it really can fuck with you psychically because sometimes you think you really build yourself up to be this model person, and then sometimes it does just take a simple microaggression to really make you either reflect, am I in the right workplace? Am I is this going to happen again? How often do I have to be around this person? And then sometimes just because more blatant acts, obviously there are even more blatant acts tend to have more protections around it, because again, because things such as purposely firing someone, you can be able to do things such as sue for wrongful termination. But when you have but a lot of those microaggressions, there's things that can happen multiple times a day, every single day in your life, and it can really decrease your own morale and really have a effect on your own mental health. So I think that's definitely what the hardest thing to grapple with it.
Okay. Great. Those are terrific answers. I'll throw a new question here, something that kind of refines it a little bit. Right now that we're still in the midst of a pandemic, people are working at home, and a lot of times our work is even digital. Do you think, I'll throw this out to the panelists, and anyone can kind of play jump ball and pick up the question. Do you think that the microaggressions exist within the data science and tech community? And if so, do you think that with remote work, that changes the nature of managing those microaggressions? Because because we're in an industry where right now so many people are working remote and digitally. I'll make that a jump ball for anybody who wants to jump in.
So I can definitely jump into that. So I think that there are many people where they benefited from work from home because they don't have to be around those same coworkers every day in person, and there is a net positive effect from it. But I think also is for many environments, including some of my most recent job, a lot of times those microaggressions can often shift forms. I don't know if anyone can also kind of speak on those, but for example, because you are at home, if let's say you decide to it can be small things, like if you decide to, like, let's say, like, make yourself some food, or like run a very small errand in your house, and you're gone for, let's say, 10 minutes, and they get that little yellow away thing, and they're like, you weren't able to answer my question. How can you can't be accessible, or things such as that. So, and a number of other things. So I found that I still love remote work, and I still think that there is a net positive from it. But I think it also applies to a more digitalized form of microaggressions that that I honestly wasn't perfect, because I kind of honestly thought it would just magically go away, but it kind of more shifts form. I don't know if anyone else have experienced that.
That definitely makes sense. I would say yes. I mean, it definitely has shifted as well. I think there's a thing that working from home, since you're not in the workspace and you're more at home, you're more comfortable at home, which means you're probably more comfortable with speaking online to people, especially since you're not having to deal with them face to face, which can, and while you're more comfortable, you also are more vulnerable to some certain things that one might say, such as Jared, not being available all the time, or if something's going on where you're dealing with it but someone else doesn't know that you're dealing with it, they might say something, like, even if you're disabled, it doesn't have to be limited to race or anything, such as gender bias and things of that nature. So I definitely agree with that, and as far as it's shifting, and I think that there needs to be more. I think that there needs to be training that addresses microaggressions in the digital space.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Could you identify yourself, please?
Hello, hi. I am Sia. I'm also a member of Black Tides, and the question you just posed made me say, hey, because we often get to a point, I think I was talking with Auntie Kim about this yesterday, where whether it's remote or in-person work environments, we usually hold back on setting some boundaries until it's like too agitating. So for example, even those small things, you might let it go the first time, the second time, the third time, and then by the fifth time, it's really hard to tell someone. So what I have done in the past is, whenever the smallest thing happens, if it's the first time with someone, it's kind of a counter to when we say giving the benefit of the doubt, and that I take it at face value and I ask them about it like I play dumb. Not in a bad way, but for example, if someone overpowers me when we're supposed to work together, I will say, hey, I noticed you, and this already happened to me. Like, I noticed you did this all by yourself, this was a missed opportunity. I feel like I could have learned from you, you could have learned from me, and we could have had this build of shared knowledge, of institutional knowledge, because we did it together. So next time, can we please try and do it together? It's not attacking them as a person, it's pointing out, the sky is blue or what is wet type of feedback, so that you're addressing the thing when it's small, and then you're setting the expectation with these people or with this person in the beginning. It's like when you start a job and, for example, you try to expense something small to see how they will react, because that tells you how they'll treat you forever going forward, So yeah, that's what I had to say, is start small.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Excellent, excellent. I think Jamal, did you speak up as well? Did you have something you want to add, or? Oh, Jamar?
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I didn't have anything to add to that.
Okay, okay.
Here, this is Kim, Data Auntie, to see and a number of others. So I want to jump in just a little bit, make a real quick point about something Jared mentioned. I think that my strategy for dealing with these types of challenges in the workplace when I was in my 20s and 30s, it's very different now than it was before. One of the things I've become a master at is using humor. And one of the reasons I do that is because things had started to stress me out so much, I need to take a different approach. And I don't mean humor as in clown. I usually mean humor as in sarcasm. So as an example, if someone had said to me, and this has happened to me before too, right? So when you're using Teams, if it goes yellow, someone made a comment, yeah, I reached out to you and I couldn't find you. And I was like, really? What do you mean? Flip it right back. Number one, what do you mean? Literally, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, there's bathroom breaks and coffee breaks and water breaks, those things we kind of mix in the workday, things we got to do to get things done. And then I make them think. And a lot of times that just they're not expecting that, first of all, because I think immediately people think you're going to go to angry Black woman route. I go to complete opposite. Right. And like I said, it just helped my disposition. Before I was kind of the militant. I went the completely Malcolm X, I guess I'm becoming more Martin Luther King to a certain extent. But again, I find that humor is great. And to Sia's point, I absolutely let nothing slide, not anymore. Because what I learned is that people that are prone to microaggressive behaviors are bullies. And just like when you were 5 years old and someone, stole your brownie out of your lunchbox or wanted to beat you up after school, they never stop. It's not the brush it under the rug kind of thing. Whereas my grandmother would say, girl, you better hang on to that good job. Sure. But, if you come to steal my brownie out of my lunchbox, we're going to have a meeting after school. Now, obviously not literally or in a way that is promoting conflict, but I absolutely believe you have to nip things in the bud. And the first time, we're past the benefit of the doubt. I think the president before the one we had right now kind of erased all that as it relates to people's intentions. And so now it's just a matter of, creating boundaries, requiring respect and giving respect, but more than that, addressing bullies immediately without question. And that's my comment.
Oh, I love that comment. That's excellent. I love, because I like the fact that you bring up the idea, not just with the sarcasm, but you ask that person to double down and explain themselves. And I think that's really important, particularly if you're communicating online. I think one of the reasons why microaggressions can be a little tricky is when people are remote, you don't have all the visual clues of why they're saying what they're saying. So you have to default to a thought that says that, okay, there may be a problem. I can say from some experience, even working with clients, there's always been a little bit of care of not working with somebody who seems very professional at one level, but somewhere else they are going off and being toxic, basically. And unfortunately, there have been people in networks I've removed off for that very reason. To Kim's great point about how we're past a point. We need to create boundaries and make sure that people are not taking something, not becoming these sort of bullies, basically, or trying to approach people in a way that's as harsh or bullying. It's great question, great comments from everybody so far. So let's see. So I'm going to ask another question here. So a lot of times, we've talked a little bit about some of the interactions we've had. Can anyone name a moment where they faced a microaggression, where it was a real challenge, very significant, maybe something that might blow into something much larger than you expected? Something that might create damage either to your career professionally or to you personally. Can any of our panelists share a thought or an experience specifically?
Pierre, I want to make this real quick point, and then I'm going to let the panelists take over. This is a very common occurrence in a data career, what I'm about to talk about, and how a microaggression can show up. And that is with someone giving you a data set, and it's not the right data set. I'm curious, can anyone just give me a 100 or raise your hand if you've ever had that happen to you? This is why I hate getting data from people. Like, I'm just going to be honest. I really, really do. That is one really effective way to damage someone's career, is someone giving you the wrong data set. And so the last time it happened to me, well, first of all, I knew to be suspicious because I knew that something in my work environment has changed. Follow your gut. That's the other thing about microaggressions. Follow your gut. And so I looked at the data set, and I just so happened, I'm not the data engineer that Sia is, but I just so happened to, just as a backup, I went to the source and downloaded it myself. Completely incorrect. So I got this data set from a person. I started doing some initial analysis, and I noticed that it just seemed really skewed in one direction by gender. I remember it all. I go back to the data set, to the original data set, I pull my own, and it's completely different. What I did in that case was, and I don't know that I would do this again. I think what I would do, I'll tell you what, let me finish the story. So I actually analyzed both sets of data. Then I went to my supervisor and told him what happened. This is the data set I got from this person. This is the data set I pulled from the source. They're not the same. And of course, he made all these kinds of excuses. But today, what I would do differently is, once I realized I had those two different data sets, and I analyzed and got the two different results, I would approach the person that gave me the data in an effort to put them on notice. And I would explain very calmly that I'm not sure what happened with this data set and why it's giving me the results that are incorrect. But I think that if this happens again, that me, you, and our supervisor will need to have a conversation. And now they're on alert. Now, that ended up being a situation where I left not too long after that, and not specifically because of that, but it was just not the right environment. But my point is that I just believe that microaggressions always have to be addressed. And when you work with data, it's really easy to trip someone up. So you have to be on the lookout at all times. Watch your six, as they say in the military. That's my comment.
I like that a lot. And I would add, even I don't think I've never had a client give data that was incorrect, but I've had bad referrals because it's been a very similar setup where somebody has sent someone that has not that sent with a bad setup, basically, rather than what it was supposed to be. And I think that plays exactly into what you were saying, Kim, about the whole idea about being, upfront about what you're sending and why you're sending it. So definitely. Anyone from our panel has anything that they'd like to share?
So I definitely can. So anyone who knows me definitely knows about me. When it comes to in the data world, I'm in data management, so I'm definitely within data quality, data remediation, making sure that data's flowing effectively into downstream users, making sure it's fit for use for those purposes. So the job I have right now, that is a more recent addition. I recently started there. Where I was, so before then, I had worked for so I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a big banking city. So for the past few years, I worked for for some of the larger banks. I worked with Wells Fargo, worked with Bank of America, so on and so forth. So this happened pretty much last year and kind of bubbling over in the kind of Q4 of 2021. So again, I work in data quality, and then so when I came into this job, they had a very disorganized data system, and they needed to have it. And there was all kinds of data quality issues, so on and this, that, and the third. And I kind of came from Wells Fargo, where they were basically building their master data management system. And again, I'm coming at this where I've done that. I teach this on a graduate level. I've written courses on some of the stuff, this, that, and the third. So I'm very much, I'm very much willing to get my hands on really solving the issues. I'm very much a doer. But that being said, I'm also not someone who works alone. So I obviously work with quite a few other people. The issue that I kind of came across is I will lay out a roadmap of what we need to do to be able to prevent these data quality issues. But then having a coworker basically go completely over my head and doing basically the exact opposite, or doing something that I did not even. You've never talked about as an idea. You've never talked about. You never consulted me about. We never agreed on any of it. And you, but at the end of the day, I'm the person who's kind of in charge of a process, but you kind of go over my head and doing something. So then when shit hits the fan, and there is a data issue, then it comes, and then it immediately goes to me. And I'm very much where I like to investigate to see what is happening, come to find, okay, this particular coworker going over my head, and this and me trying to explain myself, trying to confront this person be like, well, you own the process, even though you're trying to go over my head. Then you have issues of people then questioning your credentials. How did you get into being an adjunct professor? How did you do this? Were you lying when you say you did this, and this at your prior job at Wells Fargo? This, that, and the third. So it really does so a lot of times where people go over your head, or they're doing very unethical or very bad things when it comes to data, and it somehow gets back to you. That can very much be something that can damage your mental health, as it did with me. Then comes at the end of the year when the company is starting to do budget cuts. Who's the person who becomes the fall person? The person who quote unquote owns the process, but it was other people's doings. So, and I say this to say that you definitely need to watch your back when you're in the world of data, because you can do very bad things happen when you are doing either less ethical things with data, or when you're at a situation where they're not listening to you, going completely over heads, this, that, and the third. Because at the end of the day, you need to look out for your own career. You cannot. Sometimes I'm not trying to say never trust anyone, but I'm also saying that sometimes people do give off small, almost like pink flags, not big bright red flags, and you sometimes may ignore them because you may be in a honeymoon phase of a new job, or they may seem like a very great person. You may get along with them, but then the person may have stabbing you in the back. And I'm not saying, and of course there may be people who do not have that bad of an experience, maybe people who have work experience, but that's something you want to be able to be keenly aware of.
That's a great point, Jared. And I see Sia with her hand up. I'm going to see if she would like to add a comment, if that's possible. Sia,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
I did not hear Jared go to this, and I don't know exactly, they're a little bit different, but this reminded me of a scenario where the going over someone's head And what I say is like, bring receipts. For example, if people do this, I always, when I was managing people, I would post questions in like a public channel instead of a DM. If someone went behind my back and did something and then they messed up, I would post the issue in the public channel and say, okay, let's tell everybody what happened, because I wasn't there, right? So like, just tell us the story so we can help each other out. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that makes them think, okay, this was definitely not worth going through all this trouble only to end up here. So just especially if you are like, you know, if you're, for example, managing people. I was a first-time manager, and I had an engineer who would keep going to someone else to ask questions, and then that person would come and ask me. So then I would go to the public place and be like, okay, so you both have this question. Let's answer it together in public. So next time, you know who to go to. So it's like really small pivots that you make. And I'm not really trying to advertise play dumb here, but like, it works a lot because the people who are taking the extra effort to do something still end up at the same place. So it wasn't worth it.
Thanks, Sia. That's a terrific point. And I think to add a little bit to Jared and Sia, to what you've said, one of the things I think that becomes important in a workplace, I learned this early on years ago as an engineer at Ford, is the importance of email and documentation. I was a young engineer at the time. I had a supervisor that was, I'm not even sure what was he was saying about me behind my back that wasn't great, but he was sending it in an email, and I had the kindness of another supervisor who intercepted and pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Pierre, you may want to watch this guy's back. You may want to watch your back. This guy is sending these emails, even though I know and a couple other people know what the work that you're doing." Emails can be particularly tricky, and I think it's even more tricky being remote because you have to be made aware of what the conversations are. And thanks to things like Slack and other chat channels, sometimes people tend to send these things even as a direct or instant message. But you still need to have an email trail or something to back up what you're doing. And even if something is in an instant message, be ready. You know, you've seen this on Twitter. Be ready to do a screenshot if you have to. But I would say definitely have your be ready to have some sort of documentation that show what you agree to and that people are trying to agree to it. This is great that everyone's bringing these comments up as well. And again, if anyone in the audience has any other questions or experiences that they would like to share, definitely we'll definitely please raise your hands and let us know. That we'll hopefully bring you up and share your comments that might help as well. Okay, let's see here. So we talked a little bit about some of our experiences, particularly within the data science and the tech community. Definitely a lot of quick, tips have been brought out. Kim brought up a very good one in terms of using humor as a response, but in the sense of getting the person to respond and to double down a little bit to make them think a little bit about what they're saying. Jared also and Sia brought up the importance of documenting what you're saying and having some idea of making sure that that in having your six that you have something that shows a little bit about what you're agreeing to and how you're engaging. And question I would ask a little bit is, do you think that the current workplace policies have helped or hindered discussions that you have seen where microaggressions is kind of at the center of that discussion? What are some things that you think that companies should be doing, particularly now with so many people remote in particular, what they should be doing to kind of help prevent microaggressions from coming into the workplace? Now, I'll make that a jump ball for anybody who wants to pick it up.
Pierre, I think Kiara had her hand up. Kiara, did you want to add something to that last little bit we were talking about?
Yeah, I actually did. I had two experiences I had wanted to discuss.
Okay, go right ahead, Kiera. Sorry about that. My apologies.
Yeah, no worries at all. So the first one I want to bring up is I had an experience where someone didn't trust my insights that I provided with them from a dashboard, mainly because they had made hard assumptions about their performance or basically what the data would tell them, instead of just actually coming in with a hypothesis and an open mind about what to expect from that data. And basically, I'll go into depth about what that was. So it was actually my first data analyst job. I worked at Visa in their learning analytics department. That department was very small, so I had to stand it up. So I was also actually the data engineer. Inside that, at the time, we were currently evaluating all of the instructors from the that were doing instructor-led training for the internal employees at Visa. So that means I had to provide responses from surveys that employees have taken they'll provide a survey response based off of how their experience was with an instructor. That includes net promoter scores, basically saying things like would they recommend coming back, you're taking another class with this instructor, giving feedback on how they would like to improve the course, things of that nature. Well, we had a few different instructors. One of them, and it happened to be so that the oldest instructor there, in the sense of having the longest tenure as an instructor at the company, his scores were starting to slip, and they were actually it got to the point where basically he had the lowest performing scores. So I had to actually provide that information with him, and then I also helped provide just some recommendations based off of what feedback we were getting from the employees themselves, and then also, of course, as top of what I can think of off the top of my head as someone who had a lot of extensive training with employees and how they learn, especially how adults learn and what they will need in order to feel engaged. He took offense to that and said, "Are you sure?" You basically said, "Are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you sure that you're using the right data?" That upset me. It upset me a lot. But I did not. I had to take a breather. But I actually told him, we can actually go back and look at the data itself, but because one, I pulled the data from the data warehouse that I helped stand up. I actually was the one that had to funnel and create that, to funnel that there. And so I actually went and showed him the dashboard inside, because we have two. We had a Tableau ecosystem where that would be better for the instructors to see things. And also that was what we used to show our C-suite as well what was going on. The learning record store, which is in the learning analytics world, we don't use data warehouses. We use something more specialized called the learning record store. Basically, there's a very specific format on how to store that data. Anyways, that learning record store also contained dashboards in there as well. I showed them. It reflected the same thing as the Tableau dashboard. And then on top of that, we also got that data from, we could also pull that data down from like an SFTP server before it gets funneled into the data warehouse. So I pulled that too. So I went and manually calculated the averages compared to what Tableau and also the data warehouse was showing. And then I showed him. And also I showed him as well, like some of the actual sheets, all the separate responses from the all of the employees that took his course. And he was dumbfounded. And then I was like, do you want to do the calculations with me? He was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, I thought that maybe there was something wrong with the data. And basically he had to apologize right there to me, because it was just weird. Because the thing is, it felt more, he was more receptive to my other coworker, who's also a data analyst at the time, been at the company the same amount of time. And he was okay with him whenever he would have negative feedback from him. But when it came to me, it was certainly an issue. Suddenly an issue. But I had to actually do more of the technical work, so I felt like I would be able to provide even more insight. So sometimes you actually have to sometimes you do have to take a breather and then do a drill down with them so they can understand exactly what your thought process was and the methods you took, just so they can understand that no, it's not the data, it's you. And then also, you're not supposed to make hard assumptions about data, what the data is going to tell you anyways. You come in with an open mind. You can have a hypothesis. That's very normal. But you have to be really open enough to understand that the data can come back with anything, because you're not the machine doing the calculations. You only can see what you know from your own human eyes.
Oh, I really like that. I like that story, Kiara. Particularly your point about drilling down and showing the thought process was it's a lot. Sometimes we have to do extra to get people to. It's that old, we had to do twice as much to fly half as high, or relatively. I think you know where I'm going with that. But I love the fact that you highlighted that. I'll say from my personal experience, I had an internship where unfortunately the numbers that I had to get from was from a supervisor that was not an ally of any sort, basically. So it became even very difficult. That was a very difficult summer for me. But I love the fact that in your case that you were able to drill down and show him and force him to come back and say, "Hey, yeah, I was wrong." So definitely a very fierce and great example of drilling down and the importance of covering that. So thank you very much for sharing that. That's excellent. Um, okay. Let's go back to. I'll go back to the jump ball. I'll reset the room and reset the question again. And actually, let's reset the room just real quick. Again, we're talking about microaggressions in the workplace with our panelists Jamal, Kiara, and Jarrett, and talking a little bit about what are some of the solutions. We're going to get into some of the solutions and ways of coping with microaggressions when they happen. So I'll make a jump ball of this basically. What do you think are some of the ways of coping that are solutions for that professionals should have at the ready in their quiver, so to speak, ready to go about? And I'll make this a jump ball and let anyone answer.
Okay, well, I will start this conversation off. So let me just say this, and actually, maybe we should talk about this a little bit before we talk about solutions. You asked the question, what can companies do? Just a little short story about where I am right now. Many of you may know that I'm a chemical informaticist, and I'm literally at the company that I worked at 20 years ago when I just finished graduate school in chemistry, except that my job title now involves a lot of developing algorithms for detection of potential mutagenic impurities and chemical compounds and chemical reactions, things of that nature. Chemical databases, anything you do with data, just with a chemistry flavor. And one of the reasons, or the main reason I came back to this company was one thing: work environment. Because I had been a data scientist for about 3 years. I'd been a data professional almost 10. And consistently, every place I ever worked, there was some level of microaggressions that existed there. And this is still the case. I think the difference is that I'm really comfortable, and I've done it on probably 3 occasions with my supervisor and said, this is a situation that needs a DE&I solution is the way I word it, a diversity, equity, and inclusion solution. And I'm using that as a proxy for saying this is racist, sexist, because for me these days, those words do not have the meaning they had when I was growing up. I'll put it that way, that they become somewhat of a dog whistle, and that there's a way to say that these are things that I'm dealing with in the workplace without using those words because they trigger people. That's just what it is. I understand that there's a place for, keeping it real, but there's also a place for keeping it real with the understanding of keeping it moving and keeping it professional and keeping it so that you don't have a bad outcome, most importantly. And by bad outcome, I mean that you're looking for another job. And I literally at one point had to say to my supervisor, beyond the diversity, equity, inclusion, he said, well, what do you mean by that? I just said it. This person is challenged with me being in the position that I am as a Black woman. You don't get any more direct than that. And I'm still doing well. I'm still there. I think that I'm probably in a unique situation because there's not a supervisor I've had the last 10 years that I would have made a statement like that to. So some of it is that you may need to move around a little bit to find your voice. And so I just want to land that plane to take Pierre's point and then talk about solutions. Not the Winnebago, not the minivan. We landed the plane. So on to solutions. Black Tides is the solution. I tell people all the time, I'm still in this field because of the network that I've built on LinkedIn, mostly Twitter, and with Black Tides. Your network will be your lifesaver. And you will learn, and they will teach you different things about how to strategize and how to, maneuver in the environment that you're in. Because of the political tenor of the country right now, and call me a pessimist, although I'm really not, I think I'm a realist. I think that there's a certain amount of imperfection that's going to be constant in work environments for marginalized people. And I think that's really unfortunate, but that does not mean we can't succeed and thrive. And I think that's the difference. It's just a matter of seeking those solutions and seeking those people. And so I just want to I drop this book every time I talk. Emotional intelligence has been a lifesaver for me. It applies to everything, but it's really great about dealing with microaggressions, because on one level, dealing with that in the workplace it's a mind game. Now, with that said, there's a point where a mind game becomes too much. 2 years ago, when I was maybe a year and a half ago, I was working at a startup, got my performance review. It was great. My supervisor left. 1 month later, I got another performance review. It was 180 degrees from the first performance review. And it was about the biggest red flag of microaggression that you could ever see. I took the golden parachute and moved on to greener pastures. And so there's a point where you need to, have a conversation and things can move on. That's the situation I'm in now. But then there's also a point where you just need to move on. And so when you talk about solutions, meditating, exercising, diet, I mean, it all sounds cliche, but these are all things that I think are helpful, because a healthy mind helps you with everything in your life, right? It's just all tied together. I know that sounds really crazy. So, one of the last times though, I had a very specific incident with microaggression. I just took an hour and a half walk around my building until I brought it down a couple of notches, all on the clock. I brought it down a couple of notches, and I came and had a one-on-one. And so, I talked about addressing things in real time. I think that's really important. So it really is about your tribe. It's about your village. Again, Black Tides, we're here for anyone that needs any advice, either about dealing with microaggressions or, we mostly focus on the positive, but the microaggressions are a part of the workplace. And I would love to hear what some of the other panelists say about when is it time. Okay, you know what you need to do to have your solutions. And I'd love to hear everybody share, but I also want to make sure we talk about when is it time to move on. And I will land the plane.
Thank you, Kim. I love how you landed that plane. That's terrific. That's terrific. I know Sia has her hand up. I know Jared, I think, has I wanted to kind of make sure that Jared commented, just had his 2 cents. I know he may have to break away a little bit earlier, so I don't know if he's there or not. Jared, did you want to?
Absolutely. I don't have any points as of yet. I'll let someone else speak if they need to.
Okay, understood. Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Sia, I noticed that your hand was up. Did you want to jump in?
Hi. Yeah, I was gonna say, so you asked the question about solutions. I would say everybody, I hope everyone has a job. I pray you get one. But if you are in the beginning parts of your job, you should go in with like a test kit. For example, try logging out at 5 and see what everybody says. Try, like, essentially boundaries. When you want to have some time where you can do work, try blocking off your calendars after you know what the cadence of the normal weekly meetings is, and see how, your manager reacts. Be managing up, like if you know your manager likes to know the details, when you submit something, don't wait for them to ask, because then it starts to build this thing, fair or not. I also don't believe in fair. I would say fair is a place where pigs get judged, but like don't give someone a reason to ask you a question. And even if you can't leave, so for example, I couldn't leave 3 years ago. I had to stay at a place for 6 months and I couldn't leave. I tried to then, okay, I know these people are going to give me problems with microaggressions. I started networking outside of my team and planning ahead. So, figure out, okay, I think I want to do this job in 6 months and I don't have these skills. Who in this company has these skills? Who can I start getting coffees with? Or now virtual coffees, and learn something from. So then you have something to look forward to because something else is not working out. So that's what I would say. And yeah, definitely always always block your calendar. Please, I don't think people do this enough. I will do it and I will say, hey, I block my calendar at this time, so please only schedule if you need to. And most people will respect that. Most people will. And that's the end of the plane.
Thank you, Sia. I appreciate that. That's great. That's great. Kiara, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I did. My advice, first and foremost, is always to choose yourself, no matter what. Mainly because a lot of time, like jobs, their goal is to make money, not to cater to you. You have to realize that you're your own job, so you have to make sure that you're doing what's best for yourself. Kim left some really good points as far as exercise, eating right, and all of that. I would also say that yoga is a very good something that's really good to do. I need to actually pick it up. I used to do it right before bed, and the amount of tension that would leave my body was amazing, and I would be able to actually go into a deep slumber, and it would actually help me to shake off any bad feelings I had from whatever happened the past 24 hours. So I would wake up ready to take on, world again. Or even if it was something that was really big, I would just be less anxious about it. I also really like Sia's point of boundaries. That's also part of choosing yourself. I tell people also, yeah, in your toolkit, when you first start, you should also immediately, if you're doing anything data related, like for instance, for me, when I've had to build dashboards, I immediately create a process guideline for that. I have an issue in the past or with all my clients and all my past jobs where they would think that they can just load dashboards on me and just send out requests and think I can churn them out within a day's time or something. I actually got to the point at Visa where I had a VP ask me to give them a dashboard in 3 hours because that's when they had their next meeting with somebody from the executive team. That's not okay. Like especially when you have a bunch of other business functions asking you for things as well. So sometimes you have to stand in those boundaries and be very firm and say, no, I told you, like there is a 72-hour turnaround time or week-long turnaround time. And this includes meeting with you to discuss, requirements and metrics and all that stuff. You might feel like you're being mean, but at the same time, you're saving yourself. Because the thing is, you don't want people to set expectations based off of you continuing to say yes. If I would have said yes and not had that dashboard ready in 3 hours, I would have looked extremely bad. And then also, like I had a very high visibility role there. So let's imagine that VP told somebody that I was the reason why that data wasn't provided because I told them that it would be done. So no, and then also having that documentation. They sent me a Slack message or email. I can't remember the time. It was an email. So they saw why I said no. And then also if that exec team came to me, here's the email. Actually, your VP came to me 3 hours before the meeting because they needed data. They didn't ask for it ahead of time, even though they know I have a certain amount of time, or I have a response period. And then also on top of that, dashboard build out period. So boom, that's a way of choosing yourself. Also, sometimes you might not be able to respond quick. I know it's easier said than done to have immediately react in a moment or act in a moment on something. And then also depending on how you're feeling your emotions at the time. If you're extremely angry, probably not the best time to respond right then and there. I'm gonna actually tell y'all a story I kind of haven't told anyone before because it was just really weird. To me, I think it was a microaggression. That was really bundled up as something that it was supposed to be allyship, but it wasn't. So the actual reason why I left Visa was because there was a member on the team who actually, none of us were fond of one of the managers on the team. She just micromanaged. It was just not a fun environment when she was around. That was the common consensus across about 20 members. In either way, one of the members on the team, she actually happened to be a Middle Eastern woman. She came up to me and she was like, "Hey, I really don't like said person, and I can't wait till she gets out." And I was like, "Well, I'm not, I feel like she doesn't have the best environment, but it's, it is what it is." She ended up going and saying, "Yeah, I wish there was a way I can get her out, like in that way I can take her spot." And then she was like, "Hey, maybe we can do this thing where if you piss her off enough, then maybe she will call you the N word, and then you can go report it to HR, and then she'll get fired, and I can take the spot." And she was like, because how she says that she doesn't see color, and that's really expensive to us as women of color and stuff like that. I was like, what? Like I couldn't wrap my mind around what she had just told me, because I was like, boy, ain't no way. Like, ain't no way she just said that to me. And then, like, who thinks of something like that? And it was weird because it felt like she tried to make it seem like we were allies it was just, I didn't, even to this day, I still don't know how to like even say how that's just weird. But I felt like that was a super red flag because it was just, I feel like even that was disguised as allyship. Like, she was ready to throw me under the bus and I could potentially get in trouble just so she can get whatever she wanted. I actually didn't know how to respond. I kind of just was like, okay. And I had to go take a breather. I actually had to call out for the rest of the day because I was like, I don't know what to do. And that was actually that was the reason why I left. I left pretty soon afterwards. And that kind of actually, I left data from that on. Because the thing is, I was like, I could report this to HR, but we were in an HR function. And I was like, this makes no sense. I was just very confused. Um, so, like I said, do whatever works best for you. In that moment, I had to go take a breather, and I had to go, and I just had decided I was going to leave. Because at this point, I'd witnessed too many people doing very weird things, or they weren't the best for the workplace and they were still getting away with it. And I was already in the HR department, so I felt helpless.
Wow, that is a very powerful.
That was really so sorry. Just wanted to say I'm really sorry that happened to you.
Thanks.
Yeah,
It's okay now. But yeah, y'all can continue.
no, it's a powerful example, and it's a powerful example of sometimes allyship is not always your allies are not always in the room with you when you really need them to be, and sometimes you may even have the wrong ally. That's clearly definitely a wrong ally moment. I'm very sorry that you went through that as well. Anyone else wants to share tips or any sort of tips or insights that you think others can use as a solution for microaggression? A lot of people in the audience. Some hoping to get some few people that can speak up and talk or add some points. Okay.
Hello. I'm sorry. I know I've been talking a lot, but this is a very triggering topic.
No. Go right ahead, Sia. That's all right. That's okay. Go right ahead.
To what Kira was saying about managing up at work, I think I would also say for your clients. So sometimes, because if you're a manager in like data or engineering, you're kind of in the middle of defending your team and making money for the business. And so if you're in that position, you kind of have to balance training your client about what your expectations are and defending your team to your client. And so I would say I really like what you said about managing internally, because I definitely used to do that externally, and I would say people should do that as well. It does not always work, but you should try, because then you'll have receipts.
And Pierre, I want to add that Kira mentioned, or someone mentioned, about seeking allies in your current position, but not necessarily the people that you immediately work with. One of the things that I've learned to do just out of habit, because you never know when you might need to move around, quite frankly, is develop relationships with people, other people, you know, that you may work in a similar or adjacent type of position with. Because when things hit the fan, it's nice to be able to have someone who can speak on your behalf. So as it relates to dealing with microaggressions, I think it's helpful to do the best you can to establish a team. I know sometimes that's really difficult to do, because one of the things I've learned since I've been in the data career is that I am sometimes a quadruple minority. And by quadruple, I mean race, gender, age, and nationality. I've ended up being in one position, I was the only American on the team. And those can be very isolating experiences. So developing allies outside of your main group can be useful as well. But I think certainly the point is having allies is super important. And that's my comment.
I want to add to that as well too, because I think that, and it's great that you bring that up, Kim. In fact, I liked how you phrased earlier about your network will be your lifesaver. I think that's true. I found for myself that's been true not only during my engineering days at Ford, but it's also even afterwards as I networked in grad school and even for making career transitions into analytics. We talk about the idea, and it's not even so much just networking, but understanding where allies are. Sometimes allies, and allies sounds. I'll share just my own initial thought on it. Is it sounds like almost like a role, which you want to be careful because you want to make sure that the person is a genuine, this is a genuine person, genuine friend. Not I'm Sergeant such and such. I'll be in this role forever and ever until the end of time. But a lot of times, you can be in a situation where the ally may not be able to help you. When I had the internship with Intel with the supervisor, it took another intern who, to this day, I still, man, if she ever walked in the room, I could still throw roses at her feet for what she did. She was the one person that kind of, when I wasn't 100% sure if I had a racist supervisor. I had some inklings, but I just wasn't sure how bad it was. She was the one that pulled me aside and said, after we had done this midterm presentation, and just said, Pierre, just from what you've told me and just from what I'm seeing from this here, this is not good. And sometimes you need people to just be that basic to kind of say, hey, look, you are you're in a situation. And I'll say this also for Darla at that time too. What was interesting was that I was in operations at the time. It was supposed to be a spreadsheet model. And the problem was that I was going to the supervisor for help because he was the one that provided the model, but he was using that to ding me later on in the internship evaluation. So in other words, if I had a question, he was the person I was supposed to turn to, but according to his evaluations, he should not be the person I should be turning to. So it made this very weird do loop, and that's kind of the problem with microaggressions. I think that I think everybody here in their experiences is sharing is within the professional workplace. It's not people who are just to be blunt, ready to assault you physically, but it's the questioning, it's the mystery behind it, behind why they're doing it, and you sometimes are trying to figure out how to balance that basically. So I really like that. Again, I like the fact about networking, and I would say even if you come out of your area, definitely look at who your allies are and look at how you network with them to keep everything together. Is there anyone else here that has some questions or anything else that if you have questions or anything else, please DM us as well. If you're not comfortable commenting, or there's something that we haven't covered here, we're going to keep rolling basically here, just to kind of gives people some time to ask some questions or share some thoughts.
I got a question, Pierre. My
Yeah.
question is, I know that, from the conversation so far, that this is common within the workspace. I myself haven't dealt with it yet, but I would probably say that I feel like I've dealt with it in interviews. Do you think that is something that is possible that it happens in interviews as well?
Yes. I'm going to say that flatly. Yes,
Okay.
I had an interview. I to this day I can't stand Caterpillar. I'll say that bluntly. I had an engineering, and this was going way back, so I feel yeah, I'm ancient. I'm old. It was an interview with where the person literally was telling me that they didn't think I was an engineer, despite the fact that I was sitting at Purdue at the time. You get people that are I think in interviews you get people who do undermine you a little bit. And those moments can be, I think, to our discussion on microaggressions, those moments can probably be especially stressful, because on a certain level, yeah, you can decide, hey, this is not the company for you, and walk away. And as you can see from my opinion on Caterpillar, clearly I'm not going to go to Caterpillar anytime soon. But at the same time, if it's something that humiliates you really badly, then yeah, it needs to be called. To Kim's point, it needs to be called out, because if not, they're going to do that again to the next person. And so you have to be. So I think so. The short answer is yeah, it does happen in interviews. Does anyone else like to chime in a little bit about interview concerns that they've had in terms of microaggressions?
Pierre, I think Ari wants to speak. Ari, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Sure. Thank you for bringing me up on the stage. This has been an interesting conversation that you all are having. My name is Ariel Daya, and I am the founder, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of a company, a startup called SID Technologies, where we're leveraging AI really to mitigate human biases within decision making and communication. So, sort of like the Grammarly for bias. And we just actually participated in a MIT incubator where we've discovered two use cases, one for workforce development, and the other is for actually public safety, sort of a plug into body cameras and evaluating language from there to assess officer bias and deploy training. Um, so in terms of workforce development, with the digital transformation that's taken place, this conversation is super interesting in terms of how microaggressions have kind of transformed into a digital platform with Slack and Discord and all of that. Um, Curious what you all's experience with microaggressions are on that platform, and how your companies have taken your company culture, or how is that DI, um, what kind, if any, in terms of inclusion, in terms of mitigating these instances, has actually occurred with the digital transformation for you all in your experience? That was my question. Sorry.
I would say from my end, I'll add. You mentioned about the digital aspect. The worry that I've seen, it's been a little bit different from being in the workplace, but from a digital standpoint, sometimes you have to be careful if you're independent and you're establishing a business. You do need to be careful about partnering with people who are um, trafficking in microaggressions. And I'll say it's really hard to understand that through, whether it's through a Discord or through a platform, because a lot of times you don't know what the intention is entirely. I can say that there's been the microaggressions I've had to deal with have always been split between somebody who really just does not want to see someone Black in this position at all, to somebody who maybe you can still work with, but at the same time, they're not really understanding Black people. The former is more dangerous. The latter might be survivable depending on the person, but even then, that can be a challenge, because now you have, in terms of, how do you get this person to understand? And sometimes the workplace is not really the best platform for getting people to understand folks culturally, a lot of ways. But working with, I would say, even working with clients, you may want to be careful, because you don't want to give a message that says that you support a client who would harass somebody online. I think that's a big problem. And I think the other issue is that it's basically about clients who don't seem to understand that, doing things digitally, that the message itself, the tone is always lost. So something that might, even if you're trying to do something as a joke per se, that can get lost very quickly for certain things. So I think if you're so I think when you're trying to, so to tie back to something that Kim had said about networking, if you're trying to, if you're working independently, or if you're a small business and you're trying to work with others in, from a larger or different community, one of the things you want to be careful about is this whole idea of you have to kind of see how people double down. I think that's a big part of it. I think asking the question of why did you make that comment? Why did you approach someone? I had somebody last year that I ended a relationship with entirely because they were being it wasn't racially motivated, but at the same time they were being way too aggressive, and it showed not only in the comments that they were making in the instant chat, but also they were confirming things that they had done in real world. So I tend to worry a little bit about people who kind of go a little too over the top, basically.
What kind of comments, do you mind if I ask? I'm using this opportunity to do my research, so I apologize if I seem pretty direct about that. If you don't mind sharing.
This was a situation where the person just got too. It looked like they were up. They initially looked like they were upset because someone didn't meet with them, but it was very personal. I won't repeat the cussing out that went onto it, but it was basically they thought that person A was supposed to meet with them and they didn't. And I thought when I first approached the person in question, I thought it was just maybe a sense of mixed conversation. Maybe something got that didn't translate very email, or something that got maybe misunderstood. Which you have to remember, if you're on any digital medium, whether it's a direct message, whether it's an email or anything else, you don't see the tone of what people are replying to. So sometimes there can be something else that's unintended. But when I talked to that person, he was basically cussing the person out. It sounds light, but it was weird enough where it sounded very personal. And the problem was that offline he had talked about the person very personally in front of the person he talked about. It was in front of his wife and his daughter unknowingly. So this was like a really bad personal aggression that and to be honest with you, I still to this day don't understand what had happened. But it was bad enough where the group that he was representing, we had to go back to his group and get him removed out, which we did.
Oh, wow.
So okay. I would say, it's the idea that, when people go online, what folks, and this kind of ties a little bit, I won't get into the whole, freedom of speech stuff or anything like that, because I know that's a broader conversation probably than what we have time and drinks for sure. But the challenge becomes, people forget that when you are online for anything, there's a, an aggressive tone is when you double down at something. I think Kim had kind of hinted at that before a little bit. I think she was right for bringing that up. It's the idea that, you could say something and maybe not maybe, and yeah, there may be, it may not, it may just be an innocent intent. I had somebody the other day make a comment about, they felt safe about the red states, and they were asking me, because I was in a city, has there been any any looting going on?
Oh,
Yeah, so something very weird. And I had to take a pause and say, hey, look, it's to bring up what Kim said, it's the middle of winter. I don't think people are going to loot at 10 degrees below. But I also letting them know that it's not, I think that's a little overrated, basically. And then let that go. And the problem becomes with microaggressions is that it's a wonderment, particularly with digital media, whether you need to is it something from a misunderstanding that off-color comment that might be
mm-hmm.
not lead into something, or is there something more there? And I do agree with Kim a little bit that now, after having a black president, it's harder now to kind of give people, sometimes it can feel very hard to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, because if you're saying something too off color or too weird, it's like, okay, why are you raising this question, particularly in professional circles? And I will land my plane there.
Do you all feel like, trying to see if there's anyone non-black or person of color on this call? If there is, I would like to know, um, from a communication standpoint, when you are communicating, right, would it be helpful, in the way that Grammarly helps us all learn how to become better writers? What we're trying to do is help people, and we all have biases, right? And we have microaggressive tendencies, some more than others. But um, would it be helpful to have a tool like Grammarly that teaches you to become aware of those biases and those microaggressions when they come out in your communication, be it social media, be it, in your email, sentiment analysis? That I think Grammarly provides a bit of a sentiment analysis in the tone of your email. But to go beyond that and address, those microaggressions, those isms, the sexism, the racism, the trans homophobia, and like all of that come out even from an implicit space.
I like the idea of it. I think my gut feeling in is that while I think it may help in some ways, I think the challenge though is also what people are doing away from the device, if that makes any sense. An example I gave you with the gentleman who we had to stop, I stopped talking to entirely. Um, there was things that went on beyond just the cussing out that he had in his in when I talked to him, that led into that action. And I think it may help at some level, but I think the other challenge becomes, how do we the other challenge becomes, with microaggressions, it's always about and Kim had brought up perfectly, it's the idea of bullying, and the idea that sometimes people, you're trying to understand, are they operating from a sense of being innocently misunderstanding something, or is it or there's a social engineering that goes into how they come after somebody, like what Kiara had mentioned about with the gentleman who didn't trust her over a dashboard. So I think that part, I think I hear what you're saying with the tool, but I think that social engineering part is I think part of the anxiety that comes in there as well.
So,
Does anyone else have anything else they want to add?
Yeah, I actually want to add something to that because I work at a pretty progressive organization. We were one of the first to get Juneteenth, the Black Lives Matter. There are, Black folks in high places, all the way up to the top, C-suite, and all the way down to janitorial level, right? So everything in between. My company frequently has these microaggression workshops. Literally, that's what they call them. The challenge is that the people that need to be there don't go. And that's just point blank what it is, right? I feel like it should be mandatory. When my company says they're having a microaggression thing, everybody ought to have to go. That's just how I feel about it.
I'll second that.
Hi, Ari. So I was laughing in the background because when you unmuted, Auntie Kim, I thought you were going to go to something that we have both experienced at a common workplace, which is sometimes, I was just thinking about what you said with the AI. Sometimes when you point something out to people, they get defensive and then they double down and then it becomes a whole thing. And it just, you lose the point of the original, lesson. And so I think if anything, that would be very challenging. I am not saying it's impossible, but I mean, we should all give you $1 billion if you figure out how to make an educational way of telling people when you tell them this, for them to read and think and not react, because that is the challenge. Like we had that where it was online and the default I'm not going to go into which work environment, but me and Kim were both there. And the default reaction from our supervisors was, well, maybe they didn't mean it like that. They're a good person. We don't know what they look like, whether they're mad when they're typing this, so that sort of, even if it's something to say, okay, you shouldn't use this word because this, how do you measure the person's response or reaction to that?
And that's where our dash, we have a reporting system where, just like Grammarly, you would get a weekly, or whichever your preference is, weekly to monthly report of your improvement of your communication over time, right? If your initial communication clocked at, you have a bias towards sexism, or you're sexist, you tend to communicate in a sexist way. Through that, you become aware of that, right? That awareness gives you awareness and mindfulness, leads to mindfulness, right? And a certain level of change in behavior, and change in communication. And through that, very much like Grammarly, we're recommending alternative terms to use, right? And we're also, I think, part of the reason why there's that double down is that embarrassment. There's a bit of embarrassment that comes into being corrected or being made aware. And our goal is to do that. It's a one-on-one interaction with our solution, with the user, or the customer. And it's private. It's a private education experience where you're improving, just like in Grammarly, when you make those corrections. Grammarly is not, published it's not publishing your performance or your word count or words that you use or improvements to the internet, or anything. You get that's a one-on-one relationship. So that's how we're approaching it. And if we're able to help people become more mindful of those biases that they, because it's unconscious bias for some are, they're more conscious about it. And I think, to your point, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Zimana. I'm sorry.
Actually, it's Pierre. Name of my company is Zamana, but my
I'm
name is
sorry.
Pierre Du Bois. It's okay.
Pierre.
That's all right.
I think I think removing it from a public facing space, and correcting and guiding from a private view. I think non-Black people, or non-people of color, are very sensitive to being corrected in that way because they don't see themselves that way, right? And intent is one thing. Intent does not negate harm, right? And from a policing perspective, our hope is to move past intent, to outcome. What was the outcome of that intent? Because we think we're bogged down in intent and not moving forward to actually solving the problem that arised from that intent. And to your point, people double down. For instance, I had a conversation with a group of police officers or municipals that where they question the data that we share with them, right? All the research that's been done in the world isn't enough because there's a number of excuses that they're leftist, there's this, there's that, that's fake news, that's this, that's that. No matter how qualified, how it could even be a right wing or a right, it doesn't matter. There's an excuse, right? And at what point, I guess we're trying to figure out at what point are we going to hold leaders, whether police or in the workforce or in the workplace, wherever they are at, accountable of self-education. Everything can't be fake news. Everything can't be incorrect. Everyone is wrong but you. At what point will you do your own research and educate yourself? And this is a tool I feel like we can use to educate self, right? And I guess I've shared I've experienced a lot of what you all have shared. I'm currently experiencing it from a funding perspective, a VC perspective. We have a lot of BIPOC VCs that are popping up now, which is awesome, which is great. We need them. My concern about a lot of these ventures that are BIPOC ventures that are popping up right now is that, in my opinion, a good number of them are leveraging our Black bodies for their personal gain. And not necessarily giving back. And that's a separate issue, but I feel like it feeds into what we've seen over the last few years in the workforce, right? Where we've seen a lot of BIPOCs being promoted and being hired on at these high level, right? But then to someone said this earlier, like, how is that allyship? Allyship can be toxic too. You bring someone on at that level, what kind of support, how have you enabled them to be successful in that role? And with BIPOC VCs, one is how are they using the funds that they've been raising millions of dollars to enable themselves to support BIPOC entrepreneurs? And in the space that I'm in right now, I don't see that. I think it's easier for me to get to a white VC who isn't planning to really invest in me than it is for me to get to a BIPOC that's supposed to be interested in investing in me, if that makes sense.
That does, and you touch upon a lot of good points that also plays into the microaggressions because they come from somewhere, from assumptions that are made about people, and we see this a lot with in other areas, not just within a workplace, but those sort of frameworks play out. You mentioned about policing, definitely that's a big part of the discussion as well. So appreciate that, definitely. Is anyone cut you off, Ari, or is that?
No, I was just thanking you for allowing me to speak.
Okay, great. Thank you. No, thank you for bringing up some very great points. I know let's see. So it's 8:31 my time. I know it's probably getting a little late, but is there anyone else in the audience that has not spoken yet that would love to ask a question or make a comment that would tie into our discussion about microaggressions before we wrap up? Is there anyone that would love to? Nobody? Is everyone being experiencing everyone? Pretty much, we've talked about the key points. I guess I take it.
Well, I'm gonna just put a plug out. We're planning on beta testing in Q3. If anyone on this call is connected to VCs or angels or would like to participate in the beta, it is from a policing use case. But we are also in conjunction working on our workforce development use case. So we'd love to start aggregating a list of interested parties to participate in the beta. So let me know, DM me.
Okay. And Ari, what is your handle? What is your Twitter handle? If you can share that.
It's at the real ERIO, and my startup is also listed in my bio there, but it's at SIID Tech.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, thank you. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, we'll wrap up here. I'm going to also note, if you check out Twitter, I just posted the article on the 2020 study that I mentioned about at the very beginning. It's a 2020 study that links racial bias to microaggression. The idea that, as we talked about tonight, and I think as Kim has excellently brought up, the idea that some aggressions are not as innocent as people make out to be as a form of bullying. And this was a study that has come out that has linked what that bias is and what that means, basically. So to summarize a little bit,
may I ask?
Oh, go ahead. Is that who was that just asked?
Hi, Pierre. This is Rick Pack. I just thought to
Hey,
ask a
Rick.
question. Hi there.
Okay, go ahead, Rick. Go ahead. But pleasure to have you here, by the way, too. Come on up and speak.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to listen to you all speak. Something that I've been thinking about is to what extent our developmental experiences affect our ability to handle trauma. And as I've been listening to all of you, you sound composed. I get the impression that maybe you haven't dealt with a lot of anger despite the trauma you have experienced. So you might comment on that point, or you might comment on how your upbringing prepared you to be thoughtful, as you have discussed, in the place of these micro traumas.
Okay.
I can.
That's a great question. That's a Rick, excellent point brought up. Does any of our, I'm going to ask our panelists, with any of our panelists, I'm going to give that as a jump ball here. Does any of our panelists want to jump in on that? Because otherwise I know I'd have a comment, but I want to give our panelists a chance to speak.
I mean, I can something really quick. This is really quick. Trust me, you would have not wanted the grew up in the hood 25-year-old version of me dealing with microaggressions. That's all I got.
In some.
And I would say, like, in this moment, I'm calm about it. If I continue to discuss it further, you'd probably hear my frustration. If I dive deep into instances, then you'll hear my anger. I think as people of color, as Black people, and specifically Black women, we controlling our anger even when there is none, just being in self-control is almost it's automatic for us. It's just as much as that trope is out there about Black women being angry, we have every right to be angry about these instances. We just know that it doesn't matter how we express our disappointment, it's going to be received as anger. So we do a lot of work in controlling how we talk about these instances. At least I do, about these instances. And even when I think I'm being, Mindy Hart mentioned this in her discussion last night, where we talk about we have to really be we have to really do a lot to present ourselves, even when we talk to our own people, in the space when we're asked to show up as our authentic self. And our authentic, we can never show up as our authentic self. That's the sad truth. Um, because our authentic self um, isn't accepted, really. We can't show up with our hair, the way I'm currently wearing it out in the fro. We can't show up, with bright colors, because then it's too bright. Our lipstick's too bright. Everything that we do is too much or not enough. So it's like a lose-lose situation. I know I left the corporate space because there wasn't anything I could do right. Right. There was always, I had a VP of operations that would, when I didn't know what corporate bullying was back when I was younger, but this woman literally harassed me. I mean, in my 20s, being sent home to change for wearing a button up blouse. Okay, the same thing that the other Caucasian women in my office were wearing, I couldn't wear because I was a distraction to the consultants, right? Sent me home to change. The woman would redline my emails and send them back to me, copy my boss. I was over, on and on, to a point where she had a Nordstrom consultant come in for a lunch and learn, and it was about professional dressing. Now, I was a 23-year-old in an office of consultants, salespeople that were making six figures. I was shopping at Forever 21 Express, and they were shopping Tahari. Okay, but somehow, and I wasn't the only one, right? And they sat me up front and they humiliated me, right? The same office had Toastmasters, right? So that I can work on presenting and all of that. I have a huge, I can sit here and talk to you right now because you can't see me. I'm not seeing anyone. But when I tell you the trauma that corporation created in my life, I never had anxiety. I didn't even know what anxiety was until well after that. And I realized that a lot of my experiences there influence a lot of the anxiety I have being in large groups in a public place, being a center of attention, or having anyone pay attention to me in any way, like in real life, right? Because Toastmasters, I would get laughed at all the time. Right? And if you imagine the only one in a group and being laughed at when you open your mouth, being questioned when you open your mouth, being sent home when you dress like everyone else, being the only one, being the youngest one, I now know how much that traumatized my work. And eventually, working my way through Hollywood and the studio, I had to leave corporate America just for my own sanity's sake. So it's there's a lot of anger in me, but I can't do anything about it.
I hear you, Ari. I hear you. I hope I didn't cut you off.
No, you're good.
Okay. I wanted to address Rick's question. I think it's a really excellent question, frankly. To be honest with you, sometimes I sound, maybe, I don't know if, I don't want to use the word happy. That's not quite the word. Maybe light at moments. Maybe because there's been times when I think when I was growing up, I always wanted to be an automotive engineer, which is how I got to Ford, and that's how that life came to be. To Rick's question, I kind of knew in the back of my head that the majority of the time, or at least there was a good chance that at a good amount of time when I was dealing with racism, it wasn't called microaggressions at that point, but I knew that it would be things that people would not believe in me, or things that people were kind of questioning. and I kind of had to learn along the way just to sort of stay ready. I think when you do that, that not that it takes care of any anger, but you learn not to let that be. You realize that if you lash out, it breaks some things that might be important to you. And a lot of that deals with just being the corporate structure. Most any sort of professionalism is at a certain level is about holding things together. It's we're going through this great resignation right now in this country, and people are tired and are burnt out because of the pandemic. Granted, but at the end of the day, certain things still has to be done, and that's what and professionalism is technically about. In the general sense, it's having that at least having that surface level of having things together. Having said that, I think for black professionals, there's always been this struggle of this code switching. There's a great book by Beverly Hall Lawrence and I'm going to come back to the title of it. Basically, I'm going to go back and find it and repost. It's a book that talked about these black professionals that grew up in the 1970s. I think, if I remember correctly, just after the civil rights movement. Four separate professionals who all found themselves coming to an AME church in Baltimore because they were trying to find connection and trying to find reassurance. And I think for black people in a professional setting is always about I think the anger that's there gets channeled into to bring up Kim's point, into networking and trying to stay connected. And I think for years we've always seen hints of that, whether if you were at coming out of a black fraternity or a black sorority, for example, whether you're coming from an HCBU or if you attended a predominantly white campus and you knew people who were around the way, so to speak, basically. In any format, we've always had it in some fragmented sense. And I think as we go into these professional settings, I think for me, I can say I've always kind of knew that the microaggressions were always going to be, well, he doesn't understand anything about cars. Well, he doesn't understand anything about math. I had somebody do that. I mentioned about Caterpillar. The gentleman in the interview at the end of the time just said that he didn't think I was an engineer, despite any sort of answer I was giving, which was silly because I was an engineering student. I still remember students who did not work with me when I was at Purdue. And the people who, to this day, who I talk to from Purdue are all outside the engineering environment. None of them are from mechanical engineering. None of them are from there. All of them were friends I met through the residence hall, through other activities. The engineering friends that I needed to have to get through that time came from when I got to Prairie View. They all came there. Granted, some were also in my room, but I was able to find engineers and build an actual network that was valuable for me. So I think a lot of Rick's question is short of it. I don't think the anger necessarily is quote unquote gone. I think it gets channeled into how you network and how you build resources. I think for me that was always the thing, because I knew in the back of my head that that's my challenge was going to be corporate. And I would say to anybody younger than me right now, I think that's still there. Kim said it perfectly earlier. I know I keep referencing Kim a lot, but she had a lot of good golden nuggets per usual. The idea that, our environment is going to be imperfect. And I think you need to come in being ready for that at some level. It's not that you're not traumatized, but you have to figure out how to put it on its side, because if you don't, it will cost you much more. You're in a race and it will cost you much more than that. And I will land my plane there.
I just want to say thank you. Those responses are really helping me make sense of things that I've been thinking about my experience and how I feel. So thank you.
I want to add one more thing too. Also, I think one of the things with social media, and we're kind of proof of this because we're in Twitter Spaces. I think it's let people. I think what social media has changed how we communicate globally, like how everybody communicates globally. Whether you're, no matter what culture, no matter where you're coming from. But I think for Black people, it's allowed us to have these sort of conversations. I think the combination of having a label, microaggressions, helps. But I think being able to talk to each other, there's people I've met in different parts of the country that I would never have met in any other way if it wasn't for social media. I think it allows these sort of conversations to be a little bit more public. There's still work to be done. The point that both Erie and Kim have brought up, the idea that sometimes the people who probably need to be in these DEI discussions usually don't show up, and they really do need to be in there. I would love to make it mandatory. So yeah, that becomes a struggle basically, but at the same time, these sort of connections and the fact that they're more public, and particularly now with Twitter Spaces, Clubhouse, hearing voices, hearing the tone, helps out in understanding, what it drives home the point that there's a connection here. It's not just arbitrary or something in the ether, so to speak.
Pierre, I want to make a comment about showing up as your authentic self. So after my startup, can everybody hear me?
We hear you.
Okay.
We copy.
Okay. So after the disaster that was my startup experience, I did a 30 days of code. I coded in about 4 or 5 different languages just to get my mojo back. So there is something to be said about the trauma, but what I also decided was not being myself was not an option anymore. So the job I currently have, I showed up with a whole 2-foot-tall head wrap in the interview, and I'm still there. So while I think that you do have to be mindful, depending on where you are in your career, I'm at the point where within 10 years, I'm going to be looking to retire, right? So I'm in another mindset. But I think if I were younger, I would look for a workplace where I could be most of myself, right? With the idea that I don't think you can ever go into a work environment and be 100% yourself per se, right? I mean that per se. Like I drop some explicatives every now and again. I probably wouldn't want to do that at work, right? And it probably wouldn't be appropriate. But I do think there's something to be said about pursuing something or a workplace where you can be as much of yourself as possible. I think one of the reasons why I never really liked industry that much was because it was kind of understood that there's some aspects of yourself that you will have to repress to thoroughly survive in those environments unless you are in charge. And so to a certain extent, I kind of, geared my career that way. And I certainly had an influence in the career choice that my daughter picked, right? Like she's an engineer and she's usually the only woman in the room, but her hair is done, makeup done, everything done, right? She is truly herself. So I think there's something to be said about if you don't have a work environment where you can be most of yourself, because like I said, I don't think 100% is really realistic, then you might want to, as you're getting older, I think that it's going to get old is what I'm trying to say. So I was very intentional about wearing a 2-foot-tall head wrap at the interview. I was communicating a message, just as I communicate a message when I wear my computer glasses when I'm on Zoom. They're the Malcolm X style. All of that, I'm sending subliminal messages that I'm very comfortable with who I am. I'm here to handle some business. Let's get it done. But again, I have the benefit of decades of work experience. This was not me at 25 years old. Trust and believe. So it's a process, I think, too. So it's an evolution of self that occurs. I think there's an evolution of your career that also occurs. That's my comment.
Love that comment. Is there anyone else that wants to build on top of this discussion? This is a great question, by the way, Rick. I really love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to also add, I know Jared had to step out. He had something personally he had to take care of. So one of our panelists, I did thank him and really appreciate his comments earlier this evening as well, too. I just want to acknowledge that into the room. Jamal, do you have anything you want? Jamal, do you want anything you want to add to our discussion?
Not, no, I didn't have nothing to add to it.
Okay, okay. Kiera?
Well, I mean, I guess I can add some of my experiences, especially because Rick mentioned, childhood and things of that nature. Growing up, I was a band geek. Towards my last couple of years in high school, I actually ended up being a the I forgot what the name of it is. Oh my gosh, I'm so washed. Anyways, I was a lead for the drumline for the last 2 years, and that role is traditionally led by guys at the time, and then also they're not going to be black. So I was basically like the first black, girl at the time to basically be leading a whole drum line. And I wasn't even snare, which is usually what the instrument is that the lead plays. I played the tenors, which is the one that has like the six drums attached to it. That was really difficult, but it really set me up to really understand and have a good head on my shoulders in the sense of understanding that people are going to underestimate me or try to undermine me, regardless of what I do. um, so I had times, of course, where I would be telling people or correcting or addressing the issues that were going on or something that they needed to work on, and they were telling me because I wasn't a guy, or because I didn't do this or because I didn't do that, I wasn't qualified for that. But at the end of the day, I'm still the leader, so I had to let them know, like, we're one band, one sound. So regardless of what you think, I'm telling you because we're trying to be better. It's not, don't take it personal. And long story less long, I just had to get really comfortable with always having someone questioning me 24/7, regardless of what it was, which was crazy to me because, especially during the last 2 years, we were literally the best drum line in the district. And we were like the second trashiest school, you would say. We were just a low income school. And then we had two other schools across the highway. And they, of course, had lots of resources and things of that nature, just because the students and the families that tended to go there tended to be of much higher income. So that was a great feat, and that just shows, just don't. I just learned not to just give up on that. Also, I grew up and I was in a lot of AP classes. Sometimes, majority of the time, I was the only black person in that class. I didn't realize that until like after I graduated. But I did have a lot of times where people were questioning whether I was smart and why I was sitting in those spaces and not in the, I guess, non-advanced named classes. So I just got comfortable with being uncomfortable on top of going to the PWI. Like, it just there's always being in those spaces where I'm the only person that looks like me, but I'm supposed to be in a place that basically I was in a place I shouldn't have been in. I grew up in the hood, low income was just what I knew, but I just asserted myself so I can be in certain areas, mainly because I knew I needed to do something to get to where I am now. So that's really why I'm able to talk about things the way I am now, and also able to handle pressure differently. With that being said, I'd be mad. I'd be mad about certain things, depending on what it is. Like, if it's a small microaggression, I've been used to it. I've heard it a million times. But not sure if you heard about the story earlier, but the one where basically I thought I had an ally because she was also a person of color, a black woman, or not a black woman, but a minority of color, or a minority woman. I think that's better. Words are hard, but that really upset me because I guess that's just something that I did not expect and I had never come across. Another thing is, sometimes it could be another one that I had that actually really upset me and actually caused me to, like, distance myself from my job. Was I had a manager who I asked him for promotion. I had been at that time had been there the longest on my sub team. Yet for some reason, all the new grads who joined had been promoted way before me. I asked him what was going on and what I needed to do to get promoted. He basically told me that I needed to pick up work um, across every single team, and then see what happens next, on top of the work that I was already doing. That to me made no sense. So at that point, I had basically just given up. I just shut down. I actually received the new manager towards the end of that year. Unfortunately, it was already towards the end of the fiscal year. But she basically gave me an outline of what the promotion schedule or cycle looked like and the requirements were for that company. And really, actually, for me to move to the next band level, all I had to do was just get more higher priority on more projects and take lead of certain things. And that didn't actually require me to go and work on any other sub team besides the one I was on myself. So that I was really angry once I heard that even more. But I think I've calmed down now, and also I was very grateful that I have the skill set I have now to where I could just pivot. If I didn't have that, I probably would have been stuck in that job. But I would say I could have pivoted if I wanted to. I stayed longer mainly because I was burnt out just from hearing that. But I think it's easier to present as, a certain way on the internet compared to how you might be in person. And then also I've had a lot of time to sit in my feelings and process them and then move through it. But that's my input, my 2 cents. What is it? The plane landing here, helicopter, something like that.
We'll accept that. We'll accept any sort of flying apparatus. So plane and helicopters are accepted. So okay. Well, what I'm going to do is, I know this is actually, I'm on Central Time, but I also know some people are on Eastern Time. So I know it's coming up at 9 o'clock, which is now almost 10 o'clock on Eastern. So what I'm going to do is wrap up our discussion here a bit. I'm going to note a couple of quick takeaways from this. Again, I thank our panelists, particularly Kiara and Jamal and Jared for speaking, and also again Rick for asking an excellent question, and for Erie for being very brave and sharing her experiences. Just real quick, I posted on Twitter the article with the study, the 2020 study on that links racial bias to microaggressions. Very much check that out. Give that a good read to understand. Again, that microaggressions are not always as light as we think they are. Things to keep in mind as you move forward. I know we'll have more in this tech survival skills series, but some things to keep in mind as we move forward is, number one, as Kim mentioned, networking. Your network will be your lifesaver. So that is one thing you want to keep developing and working on. And I would also add, develop that even outside of your company as well too, to help you in anything, particularly if it's entrepreneurial. Kiara brought up a really good point about drilling down. She, in her experience, about someone who didn't believe her about her dashboard, she drilled down and showed her thought process. Be ready and develop your skills, your domain skills, as best as you can. Be ready to fight back through that. Jamal talked about his experiences about just in terms of microaggressions that he has experienced during his time as well. And then one of the things also, I'm going to note something that Ari had brought up a little bit. I know though she wasn't one of our panelists, but I liked how she said this, looking at the outcome of that intent. A lot of times with microaggressions, we're thinking about intent and not sure should we say something or not say something in real time. A lot of times we need to think about what the outcome of that intent is to help us to make a decision to fight back. So this has been a great talk. I hope this has been helpful to everyone here. I know I know a lot of people have stayed through the entire process here. Really enjoyed the panelists that have come up to talk, and really appreciate everyone for coming out this evening. So what I'm going to do is, it's 9 o'clock now, 10 o'clock, and I will land this plane in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Goodbye, everyone, and until the next talk, take care.